So, hey, nobody seems to care about gold or silver anymore. It's yesterday's news. All they seem to care about now is crypto, or as I call them, kleptocurrencies.
Well, it is an interesting phenomenon, and I to some extent, think you're right. It's from the point of view of somebody like me, a consumer of currencies. I spend Canadian dollars, US dollars, euros, New Zealand dollars. It's all good. The idea that there's a plethora of currencies competing in the market to curry my favor is a good thing. Like you, I suspect that some of the lesser cryptocurrencies will in fact end up to be kleptocurrencies, but we've seen that before in penny stocks, haven't we?
We've seen it in penny stocks, .coms, you name it. It's an ongoing cycle. But I would venture to say that the Bitcoin parabolic move, exponential move, maybe it's the other side of the parabellum, we've never seen anything like that in history, have we?
Well, it's certainly a wonderful story, and there's certainly a controlled float in Bitcoin, so one can understand. It seems to be as a consequence of its price and its move, no longer, at least for a while, a trading instrument. It would seem to be, by a trading instrument, I mean something that you use to buy and sell things. It seems more now to be a speculative instrument, but like you suggest, those parabolic up moves, the downside is usually as steep as the upside, and it may return as a consequence of that to having some actual utility. You may actually be able to pay for an Uber ride or something with one again. Right now, people seem to be afraid to use it to transact because they think it's going to go up so much in price tomorrow that whatever they bought today with it will be expensive. That too, I think, will pass.
Yeah, that's a great point. So as a medium of exchange, we've got like Gresham's law in effect, where if Bitcoin is good money, then it's been pushed out by dollars, because who would spend a Bitcoin that could be worth twice as much next week or 100 times more in a year, if that's possible?
Well, I think that's accurate. My suspicion is, now, with the caveat that I'm an inadvertent Luddite, and you've already exhausted my knowledge of technology. But, you know, the original mandate, if you will, for Bitcoin, which was sort of an anonymous, frictionless transaction thing, seems in the very near term to have been overwhelmed by the popularity of its trading. But my suspicion is that part of the reason why it did so well in terms of price was the original utility. And if it has exhausted its original utility, perhaps the luster will come off it as a trading vehicle too.
And then we have the bandwagon effect, Rick. You're probably aware of these hard forks. I don't know what a soft fork is, but I wouldn't try eating with it. But these hard forks where companies or Bitcoin miners come in and they say, oh, we got a better way, just take our fork in the road, forget about Bitcoin Classic, you know, we've got new Bitcoin. And that has got to be really disconcerting to a member of the general public who doesn't really understand the technology anyway. And then all of a sudden, oh, we got a hard fork. What does that mean?
Well, Kerry, I suspect if you and I were 23 and 24, and we were really good at math and pretty good with algorithms, that we would probably be conspiring to invent an algorithm that assigned $25 million worth of value to ourselves before we allowed the public to participate. So I certainly understand the proliferation of, to put it uncharitably, forks, and the competing cryptocurrencies. It makes absolute sense to me. If you can dream up what's in fact a complex equation and assign yourself $25 million in value as a consequence of your competence in mathematics, it would be fun to do so. I'm in no immediate danger of being able to do that, of course, because I have trouble with long division. But
well, I was thinking we could do a joint venture, Rick. I got this idea for this thing called a tulip coin, and it's going to be backed by tulip bulbs held in a vault in Holland, and on the tulip coin itself, it's going to have a thing that says, Maha, make Holland great again.
Well, if you're going to advertise your product, I get to say that Sprott is involved with the Royal Canadian Mint and Tradewinds, the people behind IEX, and we are actually working, and have been working for about a year, on a coin that'll be an old-fashioned coin. It'll actually be backed with physical gold held in the Royal Canadian Mint, and it will be redeemable for gold. I understand that obviates some of the advantage of a cryptocurrency in that it isn't tethered to anything. But for old people who like the idea of competing mechanisms of exchange, but also want a medium of exchange that's simultaneously a store of value, my hope is that Sprott will be able to offer investors the best of all worlds. Time, of course, will tell.
So it'll actually be a token, effectively. I assume it's not going to be Canadian currency. It's just going to be a token that will entitle you to redeem a set amount of bullion from the Royal Mint of Canada. Do I have that right?
That's correct. The token will be backed by physical precious metals, and if you have enough, we don't know that number yet, you will be able to redeem it. But similar to our existing precious metals trusts, what happens is if the token begins to sell at any appreciable discount to the gold price, the ARBs come in, short the gold, buy the token, present the token for redemption. So they end up being very accurate reflections, trading vehicles that are very accurate reflections of the underlying market.
Well, it's interesting you say that because it brings me back to Bitcoin again. So we're going to have options and futures and ETF. There is one Bitcoin ETF, but we're going to have these in real life. I mean, what is this going to do here, Rick? I
think it's great. An option on an abstraction or an option on an algorithm is something that really truly appeals to my sense of humor. And I'm not being cynical about this. I understand the value of the algorithm. I understand the value of the frictionless nature and the anonymous nature and the borderless nature of the algorithm. I would have assumed that Bitcoin was already volatile enough to satisfy most speculators. But the idea that you would have options on Bitcoin and then perhaps futures on options on Bitcoin, in other words, you would have a future on an option, a future on an option of an abstract algorithm. We truly live in a wonderful world.
Yeah, I see the absurdity of it. So, you know, when you look at the way things have evolved, you know, there's been how many umpteen monetary systems? Let's just call cryptos yet another. And what happens in the end to all these systems?
Well, my hope, and I'm going to once again in this interview define my own ignorance. The interesting thing to me, maybe the value proposition, is that at least this currency isn't backed by a government. In other words, there's no perverse incentive to fraud. And certainly I can understand a circumstance where in order to generate Bitcoin, you had to perform a service for the universe, which is very different than paying a tax from my point of view. And I also like the idea that the ultimate quantum of them is fixed. So I certainly think that private cryptocurrencies, an environment where private cryptocurrencies have to compete with each other, is probably superior to a system of fiat government fraud, which is what we've endured over the last 500 years. Whether the ultimate end result for most of these currencies, either fiat frauds or crypto frauds, is a different circumstance. But I certainly welcome the opportunity to have algorithms competing to generate utility for me.
Yeah, choose your poison. But what if governments actually do start to feel threatened by cryptos and they just say, hey, Rick, if you've got 10 Bitcoins or more, 5 years in jail, because we're going to charge you with intent to distribute, because it'll be the war on cryptos. What happens then? I mean, are you willing to risk going to jail to possess cryptocurrency?
I think that they do feel threatened, and I think they will do what they do. And I also think that they will constrain old people like me who are rich, technically incompetent, and have something to lose. But that doesn't apply to about 5 billion young third world people. The idea that the government of the United States is going to be able to out-hustle a bunch of young, technologically sophisticated Kenyans seems to me like a very unfair fight that the Kenyans are certain to win, and I look forward to that.
Well, but The way I kind of see it shaking out is it's a threat to all governments because, look, besides taxes and criminal law and the roads, how do governments control? Probably the most effectively through currency. So China and Kenya and Germany don't want to see a crypto. They don't want competition. I love the old saying, don't steal, the government hates competition. So they all band together and make a treaty, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, what am I doing here? Is this worth the risk?
Well, with the distributed ledger, and I'm not talking about people like you and I, Kerry, for whom time has passed, but I'm talking about the millennials and whoever it is that's behind them. I think that the distributed ledger and the web themselves and PGP, particularly double encrypted technology, means that you're having a fight between technologically agile 23-year-olds and dinosaurs like you and I, except for dinosaurs that chose a different path on the road and went to work for the government. My suspicion, as I say, is it's not a fair fight. And the gazelles, the young people, will outrun the hippos, the old people, something I look forward to seeing. Now, by the way, a lot of people who choose the wrong cryptocurrency, who choose the wrong abstract promise, are going to lose a whole bunch of real conventional money. That's a different circumstance. My earlier discussion was theoretical, not practical advice.
So where does this leave the miners, the real miners? I'm not talking about the guys in there, by the hydroelectric power plant mining cryptocurrencies, but people that actually go out and extract stuff from the earth. Is it the same party it's always been, or is this going to have a positive effect on real mining?
I don't think it'll have any impact on real mining at all, except that the blockchain or Bitcoin is beginning to use prodigious amounts of energy. I mean, truly prodigious amounts of energy. And so I suspect for the energy metal producers, as an example, the coal producers or the uranium producers, over 5 years, if the rate of growth continues, that it will have a real impact on demand for electricity. I think in the very near term, the proliferation of cryptocurrencies has hurt speculative markets for gold and silver because the cryptocurrencies are behaving and gold and silver aren't. It's interesting that in financial assets, when you have a soft market, which in terms of physical goods would be called a sale, in other words, when they get cheaper, they seem to be less attractive. So I think that, as an example, physical coin sales, gold and silver coin sales, in the last 12 months have been negatively impacted by the strength in cryptocurrencies. But they are very, very, very different vehicles. Physical gold and silver are stores of value as well as being mediums of exchange. The beauty of Bitcoin is the low settlement and clearing cost and its anonymity. So it actually, over time, appeals to a different part of the same person's portfolio.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So a person who's into Bitcoin, even if they're younger, is probably eventually going to be into precious metals as well, because it really is taking control of your financial future, taking it back from the government, right?
I think that's absolutely right. In fact, we're at Sprott beginning to enjoy a whole new generation of speculators, ones that we haven't met before. People in their 30s. For the first time in my life, many of our new clients are female, and most of them are South Asian. Highly competent in technology and very well versed both in cryptocurrencies and in gold and silver. Gold and silver because South Asian people have a cultural familiarity with precious metals that goes back centuries. Cryptocurrencies because these young women are often coders or electrical engineers. It's interesting, the wisdom of these new young clients and their ability to operate easily in both worlds and understand the utility of each form of savings.
So we evolve eventually to this private currency system. I mean, this is going to have ramifications upon the world like nothing we've ever seen before, all thanks to the blockchain.
I think that's wonderful. I could understand how a young person who was technologically competent, who organized his or her life correctly, could get the tax form and basically check the no box. Something that I'm certainly philosophically in favor of. I'm just a coward.
Well, so, you think about this, and, first we had people, our brightest minds, going into manufacturing. Then they got it in their heads they could make more money in the stock market. They became stockbrokers. Then they went to investment banking, and then to hedge funds. So is this the next logical diversion of brilliant people into cryptos?
I don't know the answer to that. That's a bigger question than I am a social thinker. What interests me personally a little bit more is the incredible adoption of cryptos among a generation that has technological skills. Well, I can't speak to yours, but they're certainly more sophisticated than mine. I'm fascinated as to how all this works, and I'm fascinated about the ability to tokenize other forms of assets so that people could, in theory, live their entire life, in effect, online, contribute value online, store their wealth online, transact online. It seems to me like a wonderful future.
Yeah. So you kind of get down to the battle of people who say the only wealth there is tangible. You can hold it in your hand. You can see a building on the corner. Your collectible, Da Vinci that you paid $500 million for. That's the only wealth. And then we've got this modern wealth that's much more ephemeral, intellectual property, stuff that you have online in your wallet. This is an evolution of the concept of property and of wealth.
I understand the value of both. Certainly for myself, it's taken me years to recognize it, but the greatest form of savings I personally have is my own education and my own reputation. It has allowed me to generate utilities as a consequence of my own intellectual property for other people, for which I have been paid handsomely. Now, I store a fair bit of that wealth in physical things, in real estate, including often, in my case, agricultural real estate or timberland, but also, of course, in metals and things like that. But I certainly understand the value of intellectual property, the value of utility that isn't expressed physically, and I respect it. For my own point of view, part of my savings, just simply because of who I am, will have to be tangible. I have always been attracted to gold myself, not as a speculative vehicle, although I've done okay speculating in it, but rather as insurance, not a promise to pay, but rather payment in and of itself. The idea that the method of payment has value to me psychologically. There have been periods of time in my life when I've had a lot of gold and periods of time in my life when I've had little gold, and I've slept better when I had a lot of gold. So the cryptos, irrespective of what they do, will never replace gold in my personal portfolio.
And probably, well, obviously, with the exception of Bitcoin, a lot of these cryptos have caps, so they're limited how many units can be created. But in the aggregate, there is no limit, and then it just comes down to confidence in their ability to hold value or to be an effective medium of exchange. But I guess that's going to get worked out in the future.
Yeah, the backside of confidence, of course, is utility. And I do understand the utility of the cryptos. I look forward to a point in time where there's 2,000 of them, so that the market can sort out the wheat from the chaff, and so that the architecture of the crypto has to evolve to suit a certain range of customers. I look forward to a Ricto or something like that, where some young geniuses dream up some algorithm that's suited to me and mine very, very specifically. Now, that may be that may be a dream that's unattainable in the time that I have left on Earth, but I look forward to somebody trying.
Well, we're at the point now where there's over 2,000 cryptocurrencies. There's even one, I don't know if this was a gag from The Onion, but a Russian company, cryogenics company, most of them wait till you're dead and then they freeze you. This one will freeze you before you die and then defrost you at a later time. They supposedly had an ICO. I haven't been able to verify it, but the concept is quite engaging.
Well, there's two challenges to utility there. One, the probable thin float of people who want to be frozen before they die, and then, of course, the underlying value proposition, which doesn't seem attractive to me at all, Kerry.
Yeah.